Good day. I'm Larry Colbeck from the Wine Company, and this is an episode of our Notable Noses series, which introduces people in our community who are not in the wine business, but who have established themselves, in my mind at least, as real wine aficionados. The guest we have today has been an iconic chef in our Twin Cities area, and is probably one of the finest describers of wine and food tastings and sensations that I've ever met. I'd like to bring in right now Mr. Ken Goff. Hey, how are you?
Excellent. Nice to see you.
Good. Please have a chair. So Ken, you've been what over these many years, just to sort of set the stage for our customers.
Besides
our
getting
audience.
older?
Besides getting older and better looking too.
I started in the Twin Cities restaurant business in the early 1980s and became chef at a restaurant in downtown Minneapolis called Fagry's, which led to my becoming the opening chef at the Dakota, which opened originally in St. Paul in 1985. And I was there for 20 years and eventually became, in addition to executive chef, I was food and beverage director there for the last 14 years. And then after that, I taught for 8 years. Yeah.
That's right. You taught you established other young people on their road to chefdom.
Trying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you did your best. I'm not.
Well,
sure
everybody did, including the students, I'm sure. So, yeah.
One of the things I'd like to say to our audience and to you in way of thanks is that there were many years that the back room of the Dakota was the venue for some pretty incredible tastings, as Ken would gather 8, 10, sometimes 12 people who have great cellars in the Twin Cities, brought them together around the table with a theme, Pinot Noirs, Burgundies, Rieslings, that sort of thing, and then we shared the wines from our cellar and a menu that you had prepared. Always great fun. Learned so much.
Enjoyed doing that. Miss it a little bit, and we've people have tried to recreate some semblance of that, and most importantly, I guess, just the camaraderie in the feel, and
it is
in different places at different times. But
and it hasn't really come together in the same fashion. And I wonder if you might comment on this. I think that was really great fun and educational, but at this point in my life and in my cellar, I'm enjoying drinking those wines more than tasting them. So I love to share them, but with a small group over dinner.
Over dinner, yeah. And I don't know about you, but originally that was how I shared wine before I was a chef. I was into wine before that, and so it was all about what's for dinner. Yeah.
Speaking of which, let's start with this, because I think, I do know what your opinions are about this, and I think it'd be really useful for the audience to hear this, and especially since I concur. There is a lot of, when you say what's for dinner, early on in your life, early on in my life, we planned wine service around dinner, or sometimes vice versa. We had a particular wine we wanted to serve. But at this point, what is your advice to people, and how do you feel personally about wine pairing with food?
I agree with it.
Well, thanks for that. And moving on to the next.
I knew that you concurred with that. Well, actually, I think that too much can be made of it.
Excuse me. By the way, would you like some water?
No, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have a little water.
I will share this water with you.
All right. This is water with a little emphasis and some phenols and some alcohol. some tannins and a,
Oh, it
and
is.
a little. Yes, it is, isn't it?
Thank you. Uh, Sometimes people try too hard, right? They'll know a wine or they'll taste a wine and they will ferret out these different aromas and flavors and say to themselves, well, what I know about food, I should do this with the food and I should have these spices and it should be cooked this way or it should have these herbs or whatever. Boy, that's asking a lot of yourself. I think that I just simply start by, there's some easy things you can do. You can do the what grows together goes together, thing, okay. Or you can just simply say, the general style of the dish is like this, and by that I mean not is it French or Italian or Asian or inflected or whatever, but is it what is the impression when you eat it? Is it really light? Is it richer? If it's really light, get yourself a light wine. If it's richer, get yourself a richer wine. And of course, you can do the compare or contrast. You can say, well, I think a rich Chardonnay with lobster is fine, or you can decide that you want something more acidity, less fruit to counteract the otherwise richness. That's right. But I try and match the weight of the wine with the dish, and then the only other way I'll tweak it is if it's particularly spicy. I don't want a wine that's got a whole lot of alcohol and tannin, or it'll just be a jarring thing. Yeah. And whether or not a little sweetness in the wine might help or not.
Do you have, speaking of that, do you have a memory of a particular wine and food combination that stirred you?
Sure, I do. The first wine and food combination that really stirred me was in the winter of 1980-81. I mean, I can remember it. I was a poor culinary student, but I'd already started a little cellar, okay? And I had nearly no money. So I couldn't afford to drink cheap wine, which is to say I couldn't afford to go out and buy wine. So I robbed the cradle a few times that winter with young Bordeaux's that in full or half bottle. But I remember having a wine from a really mediocre vintage, back when there were really mediocre vintages, of Chateau Giscourt, 1973.
The Senna stuff, is it not? Giscourt?
Margaux.
Margaux.
Yeah, and if Robert Parker were giving ratings, it's 80 maybe or something like that, right? But we all wish when we set a wine down that when we do choose to drink it, we've hit it at the right time. As a mutual friend of ours says, we want the chemistry set to work that day. And I made a very inexpensive mushroom soup, bought a nice loaf of bread, and I had those together. It doesn't hurt that we were sort of hibernating. It was a tough winter with my sweetheart, but that was dinner: bread, mushroom soup, Chateau Giscourt, and sometimes you think you get it at the right year, maybe the right part of the year. Boy, when you think you got it on the right day, you really feel happy, right? So that, and I remember, the first time, I didn't know what oysters fresh on the half shell tasted like at one point, and there was a time when what I'm about to say is not the weirdest thing in the world, but one day there was a man shucking oysters in our yard. That used to happen. And I went down to see what was going on, and he didn't actually live in our building. He was from the neighborhood, but thought our yard would be a central location, and he just wanted to give away shucked oysters to people. And,
wow.
So I went down there along with my girlfriend, and I knew, based upon the people I hung with, that I was supposed to like oysters on the half shell, but I was a little, I don't know. So he says, want an oyster? And I just thought, all right, I'm gonna man up here. And that, I have no idea what it tasted like, Larry, because it hit the back of my throat, went down, and all I wanted to do was not, tear up like that, right? And so that worked, right? I did that. And then he said, well, here's another one. And I went, okay. I did the same thing, and my girlfriend busted me. She said, you didn't even taste that. And I went, oh, God, okay, great. So then I had my first oyster where I actually tasted it, and it was pretty ambivalent about it, okay?
Okay.
But I kept at it, not that day, but in the future. And then I remember having it for the first time, some oysters in New Orleans when I was visiting my parents with Chablis. So that was my first oysters in Chablis. It was sort of a vaguely oysters Rockefeller style preparation, but not
Well, that sounds like New Orleans.
Yeah, but they weren't in the shell. They were in a gratin dish, and it was like a spinach souffle and herb souffle on top, and it was. And I just went, yeah. And it wasn't even necessarily an amazing Chablis, but it doesn't have to be.
No, and which is a wonderful example talking about finding wines in off vintages and things like this, like the Giscour you were speaking of.
I haven't heard the term in a long time, but you will recall back when in the trade there were, particularly for Bordeaux, there were what were called useful vintages, which meant you could drink them younger and some money would roll in, and for you and a restaurateur or a wine retailer. Vintages. Yeah.
I have to tell you that we're fresh back from our spring trip to France. Every year we do this. We're tasting the 12s, which have been bottled now, most of them, and the 13s out of barrel. And talking about useful vintages, you talk to many of the people in France, in Burgundy, and this comment came from a Bordelais vigneron who just did not want to talk about the 13s. And he said, not unlike this useful vintage thing, he said, the good thing about them is that we don't have much. Because not only was it horrible, it was short. So it was at least that. They don't have too much. I did that one. So for myself and other people who might love to know, can you walk us through? You talked about you had begun an early cellar. What's your cellar like now? Does it have a regional focus, a breadth, or is it?
It is mostly French, and most of that is Burgundy, and there are a few Chateauneuf, some Bordeaux, but those are getting along now. It's been a long time. And I started out first putting down Bordeaux because it was understandable. It was pretty reliable. You really could sort of know what you were getting, and even then, when there wasn't an internet and wine pundits like now, you could know that 75 was a really good vintage, 76 pretty good, 78 good, 79 not so bad, 80 and so forth. And so I put down Bordeaux's, and you could also they were affordable. I didn't pay $15 for anything.
Right.
And based upon my experience, I remember once sharing over lunch with you a 75 Bechevel at the New French Cafe a long time ago. And I bought a relatively large amount of 75s, and they were really good when they were 5 or 6 years old, and then I didn't touch them for a while, and then I tried them, and they were dumb. And I didn't know about that so much then. And then they came alive, and then they went into a dumb stage, and then we had it that day, and it was lively. I had one a couple of weeks ago that was great shape, not from my cellar, but so the last a really long time, even in not the greatest cellaring conditions.
Right.
And they're I don't want to say they're indestructible, but they're sturdy.
And this is.
But eventually, I came to Burgundy, and I thought to myself, well, I don't gamble, I don't, play the lottery, I don't go to casinos. I buy Burgundy.
Yeah. Would you explain to the audience exactly what the joke is there?
Well, okay, so you can buy by the book. You can say, all right, this is a vintage. This is that is well regarded, and no doubt it correctly so. And then you can go to a famous vineyard, of which there are plenty, and then you can go to a reputable producer, and you can buy that wine. And later on, when you drink it, you're just going, I could have had a V8, It was just like, and then other times, this is interesting. Now, producer Maurice Eckard, with which you are very familiar, famous producer of Sauvignon Le Bon. A few years ago, there was a tasting of Burgundy, specifically Beaune, and it was interesting that there were about 4 different vintages shown up from different people of the exact same Eckard Sauvignon. I think it was the Serpentier.
Okay.
And the one that was hands down best, everybody agreed, was from what was regarded as the weakest vintage.
Yep.
Of the 3 or 4 that were there.
I have to say, I know, and this is the gamble.
Yep.
And I have to say to you that, and I probably have. Ken and I have shared lots of stories about wine and things over wine and dinner. Is that when we go like this February, a lot of these producers, I've seen them, every year for decades, and so they will often, at the end of the tasting, some of them will pull out an unlabeled bottle to pour, and to see if we can guess. And the theme I find most prevalent, which also gives me a leg up on guessing, is that they like to pull out the off vintages because they want to show you just how good those off vintages are. And the off vintages have often been declared by American press, and sometimes way ahead of the time when they've been able to accurately assess.
Well, and then of course there's also the question of what style does this producer make, and if you're trying to assess in barrel or recently bottled Hubert de Monty, how do you do that?
Right.
It's like trying to assess Diamond Creek Cab at 2 years old.
Right.
Where is this going to go? I hope I live long enough to even find out.
Well, yeah. I'm gonna answer the question because the audience may have the same thing, Larry. What the devil are you doing over there tasting 12s and 13s at this point? And we have to decide what we're going to buy.
Yeah.
And in vintages like this, we have 2 difficult vintages back to back. It's really hard, and you have to, in order to get through, we have 3 short vintages in a row, so there's not much wine in the cellars. You would cry if you went into them because they are so empty. The barrel cellars are so empty that we might go back and buy some of the wineries keep old vintages, and we might be able to buy some of that because they're going to release some in order to keep some cash flow coming through on these short vintages. But you also have to buy even the awkward vintages. But you do, after doing it for 20 years, you do get an idea of when you taste a barrel or Riesling bottled wine, you get an idea because not so much that you can predict where it's going to go from where it tastes, but you can associate it with vintages that you've tasted like that and now know where they went. And so if the 11s taste like the 7s, then you know where the 7s are now, you can guess that that's where the 11s are going to go. That's
and bless them for their enthusiasm, but no under 30-year-old sommelier is in a position to do that. They can go off to, trip to Oregon, California, Washington, France, Italy, Spain, but They have a lot to look forward to.
Well,
That's
and
the cool
why
thing.
that's why I think most of our audience who love to go out to dinner at restaurants with fine wine lists ought to invite you and I, so we could,
Yeah.
we have that experience and would be happy to share it with you as long as you're picking up the tab.
A useful service.
A useful service.
Yeah.
We'll have to think of a name. Ken and Lair's pretty good wine service.
Pretty good wine service.
So, did you grow up cooking? And what, or maybe just familiar with food, and what stirred your passion to make this your vocation?
That's easy. And I better blurt it out while I can still recall. When I was a kid, I didn't really cook, but my mother was an excellent home cook. What I did was be in the kitchen with her. Sometimes I would do some extremely simple task, like let's say I would peel some potatoes, okay? And later on, by the time I was a teen, I would just putz around a little bit, making some extremely simple things. But I got comfortable literally with a pan and a burner and a spoon and a bowl and a whisk. And what I didn't realize is that put me in a position later to be essentially just fearless. I wasn't intimidated by anything in the kitchen. And having seen a lot of young people come into kitchens, a lot of them really are. It's daunting, right? And I was not daunted.
Okay.
So I had that. And then I was working in a completely different field and very unhappy. All of my friends knew that I didn't like it. And I had started maybe 2-3 years before this buying wine to lay down, specifically 70, 71, 75, 76 Bordeaux. Those were the easy ones. And I would and I'd read a couple of books about wine, and it became clear early on that this wasn't like other alcohol. It wasn't like beer. It was meant to have with a meal, according to all of these sources. And I went, well, that's great, because I really like to eat, and I don't know anything about food. But my parents lived in Louisiana by that time, and when I'd visit them, I would eat things that, well, you couldn't get up here. Let's put it that way. And it was fascinating. And about that time, some more interesting sort of newer style restaurants began to open in the Twin Cities. The Sofitel had opened with a couple, 3 restaurants in there. There was the new French Cafe, eventually the 510, and then a restaurant where my first job was La Tortue. But so I thought, well, I will try to cook dishes that I had when I was out and and do a dinner party. And the dinner party would be announced dinner at 6:30, and then at 9:45 I would have it on the table, largely because I had no idea what I was doing. But I was fearless, and I wouldn't give up. Otherwise, if it's going to be that late, you just order a pizza. But we didn't do that, right? So, and my friends, bless their hearts, said, "This is wonderful." It wasn't as wonderful as what I'd had at the restaurant, but and I enjoyed doing it, right? And I would be tired, but I enjoyed it, immensely. And then they said, "You're a great chef." And I said, "Well, I'm not even a chef at all. I'm just a home cook trying, my best." They said, "You could be a chef." I said, "No, I never worked at McDonald's. I didn't bus tables at the country club. I did nothing. I hadn't even seen a kitchen, except looking, over the counter at a Burger King or something,
Right.
So I said, I have no experience at all. And they said, they must have schools for that. And they did. And so I quit my job and went to school.
Excellent.
And so they merged a little bit for a while. Yeah.
Nice. So, off the cuff, at this very moment, at this stage of life, what wines would you serve to whom at your ideal dinner?
Well, I would serve Burgundy to you.
Thank you.
And if the meal stretched out a little bit more, you might get the last of some Chateau Beaucastel. I don't remember where I got that.
Wow.
And we would have probably early on in the meal, and if I was really getting fancy at home, I would cook some foie gras, and we would have a Mosel Bauschlitz or something, maybe a Sauterne. But
I love the idea of a Mosel.
Yeah, but the Sauterne is a little bit more cliche, and
is?
it deserves to its reputation. But the Mosel Auschwitz, starting off, later, and we would eat duck or lamb, or and we would, for those of you out there, we would have the cheese after the meat.
Right. And we drank white wine.
We certainly, yes, and that's the other thing, and is the odd thing about the way meals work. Now, in some ways, Larry, it may be easier, since these days that classic progression of a meal based on a French or an Italian model exists for so few people out there, right? They can have sushi for a course. They can have something Mexican influenced by, and they can have a cocktail, a beer, and then a glass of wine. And so the order starts to get, I'm looking forward to seeing how that shakes out over the decades to come, because we're not going back to the, you're going to have mussels and you're going to have some muscadet, and then you're going to have this and you're going to have that. That will never come back, I don't think, not in this country.
But I wonder if as you say, how it shakes out, whether the young adventurous diners are going to, well, like we did, learn something about it and find some personal rules for how they like to proceed.
And that's, I think that's the most important thing is, you got to figure out what works for you. It makes it harder to maybe put together a meal with a group of people, out at sitting down with, 3 or 4 or 5 other people, and at a certain kind of restaurant, you knew that appetizers were going to be of this ilk, right?
Yeah.
And then so you could order wine like this, but now it's a little bit right. So then you got to have a dinner party.
Yeah, you got to have a dinner party. And I just wanted to clarify. I said then we drink white wine. For years, I served red wine with cheese.
Yep, me too.
And it was a mistake.
So many really go so much better with. Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't know if we've talked about this. But if you've got a nice Sauvignon Blanc, almost whatever cheese you got, you're going to be happier. You may not hit a home run, but you're getting on base.
Yes, yeah. Very good, very good. And then there are 2 questions well, 3 actually, that are really from the Actors Studio. If you didn't do your avocation, your vocation, what would you like to do? What would you like to have been?
This is called a pregnant pause, because I should have anticipated a question like this, and I didn't. I thought some kind of designer, perhaps an architect, or something. There were when I was younger and didn't understand what were going to be my physical limitations, I would have liked to have been a professional athlete, perhaps a basketball player.
Basketball.
Right, but then I topped out at 5'11", and it isn't that I wasn't athletic, but there were just too many people who were 3 inches taller, 30 pounds heavier, who were just as quick as I was, and so, yeah.
And then another of his questions that I like was when you arrive at the pearly gates, what do you hope St. Peter will say to you?
Where you been?
Where you been, excellent.
I don't know.
We've been waiting on you.
Welcome.
Sorry, you're late for your reservation.
I guess
we let somebody else take the table.
I guess welcome. That might work. Or your usual table. I don't know.
Oh, excellent. Well said. Well said. And then the last one, and we have internally struggled with whether we should include this one, but it is one of his famous questions. It's, I think, always his last one. What's your favorite swear word?
Oh, it's fuck.
Fuck.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Ken,
and because it's so, and it edges out shit in terms of usefulness by a little bit.
and that's important.
Yeah.
You only remember so many words, so you want to get the ones you really remember and are useful. Ken, thank you for spending time with us. I'd like to take you to lunch. We'll eat some oysters and drink a Chablis. How about that?
That sounds fantastic.
Right.
This has been a delight.
Thank you very much.